The day after my father died, my brother looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't bother getting your hopes up, Claire. Dad left everything to me." I thought he was grieving. I thought he was angry. But when he added, "You weren't exactly his favorite," something inside me broke. For nearly 2 months, I believed him. Then I sat across from a lawyer in downtown Chicago and heard 6 words that changed everything. "There's another document you haven't seen." And suddenly, my brother's confident smile disappeared. My name is Claire Mitchell. I'm 42 years old, and I live in Naperville, Illinois. Before all of this happened, I considered myself lucky. I wasn't wealthy, but I had a stable life. I worked as a high school guidance counselor. I owned a modest 3-bedroom home. I had a husband named Eric and a 16-year-old daughter named Sophie. Life wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable. My father, Robert Mitchell, lived about 40 minutes away in a suburb outside Chicago. Dad had spent 38 years running a commercial plumbing business. He wasn't flashy. He drove old pickup trucks. He wore the same work boots for years. But he was smart with money. Everyone knew that. My older brother, Jason, knew it better than anyone. Jason was 45. Charismatic. Confident. The kind of guy who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. Growing up, people loved him. Teachers loved him. Neighbors loved him. Dad loved him. At least that's what I always believed. I was the quieter child. The responsible one. The one who visited Dad every week. The one who took him to medical appointments after Mom passed away. The one who handled paperwork when his health started declining. Jason lived only 20 miles away, but sometimes months passed without him seeing Dad. Still, Dad never complained. Whenever I brought it up, he'd just smile. "Your brother has his own life." That was Dad. Always making excuses for people he loved. Then, one cold November morning, everything changed. Dad suffered a massive stroke. 3 days later, he was gone. And that's when the real nightmare began. Because grief wasn't the hardest part. The betrayal was. And I had no idea how deep it went. The funeral was packed. Former employees. Friends. Neighbors. People whose pipes Dad had fixed 20 years earlier. The line stretched out the church doors. After the service, everyone gathered at Dad's house. I was standing in the kitchen when Jason walked in carrying a folder. He closed the door behind him. Then he dropped the folder on the counter. "I've already spoken with Dad's attorney." I blinked. "What?" "The estate's settled." "Settled?" "Dad died 3 days ago." Jason shrugged. He had everything arranged. Something felt wrong immediately. "What does that mean?" He crossed his arms. "It means Dad left everything to me." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What are you talking about?" "The house. The business. The investments. Everything." I stared at him. "And me?" Jason looked away. "You weren't included." The words hit like a punch. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. Dad and I spoke almost daily. I had helped care for him. I had sacrificed vacations and weekends. There was no way. "No," I said. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." His voice was cold. Dad made his decision. Then he picked up the folder and walked away, leaving me standing there completely shattered. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every conversation I'd ever had with Dad replayed in my head. Had I missed something? Had he been angry? Disappointed? Had I failed him somehow? Even Eric started worrying. One night he found me sitting alone in the dark. Claire. I looked up. What if Jason's right? Eric sat beside me. No. But what if Dad really didn't want me involved? My husband shook his head. That's not the man you'd described for 20 years. His certainty gave me hope. But I still couldn't shake the doubt. Then another problem appeared. Jason suddenly put Dad's house up for sale. Immediately. Without discussing it. Without consulting me. Without even informing me. I found out from a neighbor. And that's when suspicion turned into alarm. Because something wasn't adding up. Not even close. A month later, I received a call. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Thank God I didn't. Ms. Mitchell? Yes. This is Daniel Harper from Harper & Lewis Estate Law. My heart started racing. Dad's attorney? Yes. We need to meet. I sat upright. Why? A brief pause followed. Then he said something strange. There are documents requiring your presence. Documents. Plural. Not document. Documents. Suddenly, Jason's story felt shaky. Very shaky. The appointment was scheduled for the following Friday. The entire week felt endless. I barely focused at work. I barely slept. Questions consumed me. What documents? Why now? And why hadn't Jason mentioned them? By Friday morning, my stomach was in knots. I walked into the law office expecting answers. Instead, I got the biggest surprise of my life. Because Jason was already there. And he looked furious. The lawyer greeted us calmly. Neither of us spoke. The tension was unbearable. Finally, Mr. Harper opened a file. Before we proceed, I need to clarify something. Jason leaned forward. We already handled this. The lawyer ignored him. Then he looked directly at me. Ms. Mitchell, your father left specific instructions. My pulse quickened. What instructions? Mr. Harper removed a sealed envelope. Yellowed. Old. Very old. He instructed our office to release this only if both children appeared together. Jason's face turned pale. And for the first time since Dad died, I saw fear. Real fear. The lawyer opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dad's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Mr. Harper began reading aloud. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. My throat tightened. The room became silent. Then came the sentence that changed everything. For years, I suspected someone was taking money from my company. Jason shifted in his chair. The lawyer continued. I didn't want accusations. I wanted proof. My eyes snapped toward my brother. His jaw tightened. The next paragraph was devastating. Dad had quietly hired forensic accountants 3 years earlier. They reviewed business records, bank transfers, corporate accounts, everything. And what they discovered shocked him. More than $800,000 had disappeared. The transfers led to one person. Jason. The room felt frozen. No, Jason snapped. That's ridiculous. But the lawyer wasn't finished. There was documentation. Bank records. Accounting reports. Signed findings. Dad had gathered everything. 4 years. Without telling anyone. Including me. Especially Jason. And then came another revelation. Dad never confronted him. Not because he didn't know. Because he was waiting. Waiting to see if Jason would admit it. Waiting to see if he would change. Waiting to see if he would do the right thing. He never did. Jason exploded. This is nonsense. He stood up. This is manipulation. The lawyer calmly slid several folders across the table. Evidence. Pages and pages of evidence. Jason stopped talking. His face turned gray. Because he recognized every document. And so did the lawyer. The transfers. The shell accounts. The withdrawals. The signatures. They all pointed to him. The confident older brother who claimed Dad left me nothing. The grieving son. The victim. The hero. He had been stealing from our father for years. And Dad knew. The entire time. But the biggest shock was still coming. Before I reveal what my father's final decision actually was, take a second to subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you do if a family member lied to you about an inheritance? Because what happened next left everyone in that room speechless. Including me. The lawyer opened a second folder. This one contained Dad's actual estate plan. Not the version Jason had described. The real version. Mr. Harper adjusted his glasses. Then he smiled slightly. Your father amended his estate 6 months ago. Jason's head snapped up. What? The lawyer continued. Following the accounting investigation. I could barely breathe. The house? Not Jason's. The investment accounts? Not Jason's. The business? Not Jason's. Everything had been transferred into a family trust. And the sole trustee was me. I stared at him. Certain I'd misheard. Excuse me? Mr. Harper nodded. Your father believed you were the only person he could trust. Jason looked like someone had pulled the floor from beneath him. But there was more. Much more. Dad's letter explained everything. For years, he'd watched quietly. One child showed up when nobody was watching. The other showed up when money was involved. One child gave. The other took. One child earned trust. The other destroyed it. And Dad had finally reached a decision. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. The room fell silent. Jason couldn't even look at me. What happened next was the hardest moment of my life. Because Jason started crying. Not angry tears. Not fake tears. Real tears. The kind I'd never seen from him. For a second, I saw my brother. Not the liar. Not the thief. Just my brother. Broken. Defeated. Ashamed. I didn't think he'd find out. The confession came quietly. Almost like a whisper. The lawyer said nothing. I said nothing. Jason stared at the table. The business was struggling. I borrowed money. Then more money. Then I couldn't stop. He finally looked at me. I'm sorry. Years of resentment flooded through me. Years of lies. Years of manipulation. The funeral. The inheritance lie. Everything. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked one question. Why tell me Dad left me nothing? Jason lowered his head. Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd discover the truth. And there it was. The real answer. Not greed. Not inheritance. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. Fear of losing everything. Which he already had. The legal process lasted months. Jason was required to repay a significant portion through asset liquidation. Several properties were sold. Luxury vehicles disappeared. Investment accounts vanished. The lifestyle he spent years building collapsed. Not because I wanted revenge. Because actions have consequences. And Dad had made sure the truth would survive him. Even after death. A year later, I visited Dad's grave. It was a quiet spring morning. Birds chirped in the distance. Fresh flowers rested beside the headstone. I sat there for nearly an hour. Talking to him. Just like I used to. Eventually, I pulled out the final page of his letter. The part nobody else had seen. The part written directly to me. It said, "Claire, if you're reading this, don't let bitterness become your inheritance." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I cried. Because even after everything, Dad wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about healing. Jason and I aren't as close as we once were. But surprisingly, we're speaking again. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. For the first time in years. Trust takes time. Sometimes a very long time. But truth has a way of clearing space for real relationships. Even damaged ones. Losing my father taught me something I'll never forget. Money doesn't reveal character. It exposes it. When greed enters a family, masks fall away. Secrets surface. Truth emerges. But eventually, honesty wins. My brother thought he could rewrite my father's legacy. Instead, my father had already written the final chapter. And in the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the house, the business, or the money. It was knowing that the man who raised me saw exactly who I was. And trusted me with the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive immediately. Sometimes it waits quietly in a sealed envelope. Until the day it matters most. And when it finally arrives, it changes everything.